Hello and welcome to this series of lectures entitled Come Search With Me. It really is an invitation to you to walk with me as we go through this journey of inquiry. I was born and brought up in India, a land of tremendous diversity in language, culture, food, dress. In fact, this dress that I am wearing is from the northern parts of India. There's another part that is really diverse in that country, and it is the question of religious beliefs. Hinduism is its dominant religion, and India has the largest population of Hindus in the world. India also has the second largest Muslim population in the world. In fact, we have more Muslims in India than we have in the whole Arabian Peninsula put together. Buddhism was born and cradled and nurtured in the eastern parts of India. Tradition tells us that Christianity came to India in its very first generation. St. Thomas came there, and even today there are monuments to his name. Sikhism, Jainism, with the milieu of agnostics and atheists, that is the crucible in which I grew. Naturally, I had a whole lot of questions, and some of those questions bothered me, vexed me a great deal. So I went on a journey of inquiry, a journey that went on for more than 20 years. I asked people and then read up. After I finished the 20 years of search, I tried to spend the next 5 years in organizing the material into a stepwise reasoning that I would find acceptable and actually satisfying to me. And this is what gave rise to my seminar called Come Search With Me. So I would like now to invite you to come with me on this journey. We'll go through it briefly, but I hope we can learn something out of this presentation. The question is big. And when we address such a big question, it is usually wise to lay a foundation first. Here's a statement, and it's a purpose statement. This seminar has been deliberately designed to encourage critical thinking in regards to a common topic that appears to elude universal agreement at present. The question is about God, and there are many facets to this question. One of them is the following. There is a great, what I call a great divide. One side says God, in quotes, the side of the atheists, who say that God is non-existent and fictitious. The other side, B, believer, says that God is relevant and factual. How shall we address such a big question with our small minds? Will we be competent to do it? Well, listen to the statement by Henry G. Statements from authorities in a field should be as subject to scrutiny as those emanating from the most humble sources, even a beginning student. So that includes you and me. Here's another statement by Judge Graham. Science is not an inscrutable priesthood. Any person of reasonable intelligence should, with some diligence, be able to understand and critically evaluate a scientific theory. In other words, we should not be intimidated and overwhelmed by a string of PhDs behind a person's name. Whatever is said, however the theory is expressed, we can try to bring it down to our level and scrutinize it, evaluate it, examine it. So that's what we are going to do with this big question of, is there a God in existence or is there not a God in existence? It is a very peculiar debate. It is not A versus B. It is rather A versus non-A. And here's what I mean. One side says, for example, there is an apple on this table and it's in the next room. The other side says There is no apple, there is no table, there is not even the next room in existence. You can see immediately that they are far apart in their claims. In other words, if you are on one side, you are not in the other. If you are on this side, you are not on the other side. Mutually exclusive. Not only that, but if you are on one side, then the concepts of that one side hold you completely in its grasp. It envelopes you completely. Similarly, if you're on the other side, the concepts here completely envelops you. So in other words, not only are they separate and distinct, they are all-encompassing. And if that's the case, then there is actually no middle ground. But people say there is. They call it agnosticism. But agnosticism is only a confession of inability to choose. I don't know. That's what they say. Agnostic. A is without gnosis, knowledge, without sufficient information to make a reasonable decision. But it is not a real option. Why do I say so? Let me give you an example. If I put my hand behind my back and ask you whether there is an apple or an orange in my hand, if you say, I don't know, does that I don't know create a third fruit called I don't know? It does not. Saying I don't know is only a confession. The only two options are theism and atheism, and they cannot be more widely separated. They are so distinct and far apart. Agnosticism, therefore, is impractical. Why would I say that? Because here's an example. These two jurisdictions are widely separate. Let's look at two countries, for example. The United States, where I now live, and India, where I was born. In the United States, we drive on the right side of the road, whereas in India, we drive on the left side of the road. Suppose we come to a position in which we are at the wheel, but we don't know. We don't know in which country we are. Does that I don't know allow you to make a third country in which you drive on the median? Of course not. You still have only two countries. And that's why I said agnosticism is quite impractical. Why? Because at any given point, an agnostic makes decisions as if theism is relevant, God exists, or as if atheism is relevant, God is non-existent. Agnosticism is not a real option. But here's a statement by Kurt Gödel that throws a spanner in the whole works. He enunciated in the last generation a theorem known as the incompleteness theorem. He mathematically proved that a firm theory, that means a claim that this is the established truth, is valid only if all the pertinent data is at hand and is taken into consideration. But really, who can claim to have all the data relating to our question? Nobody. So everyone, by mathematical certainty, is an agnostic and only an agnostic. Wow! So what shall we do? Is everybody is an agnostic, and at the same time agnostic is not a practical solution. Well, I've thought it through, and here's what I'd like to say. Agnosticism, while it is the only correct and honest claim, it is also totally impractical and phantom-like in its position. So what about the believer and the unbeliever? Here it is. A theist or a believer is an agnostic who has chosen to believe in the existence of God, whereas an atheist is an agnostic who has chosen to believe that God is non-existent. What is common is that both are agnostics. and both depend solidly on belief. But there's a difference, because the bases of that belief are widely different. And what are those bases? The theist's base is a confession that their belief they derive from a declaration in a book, for example, the Quran, or the Rig Veda, or the Torah. The atheist's base is a bold claim. They say their belief is based on scientific reasoning and logic. Now, at this point, if there is only a confession and a bold claim, then really the bold claim is impressive. I would agree and acknowledge to that. But confession or bold claim, both are beliefs. So with that word, let's push back or pull back a little bit. You know, when this topic comes up, everyone gets tight. We gets tense. We want to win the argument. We don't like the other side to win. But let's pull back just a little bit about this question of personal beliefs. We, you and I, can choose what we want to believe as the truth of the matter, whether there is good evidence, no evidence, and even evidence to the contrary. Why? Because belief is a choice. Nobody can make you believe. They might be able to make you say something about your belief, but they can never make you believe. Belief is only your own property, personal and private. It has your name stamped on it. Nobody can believe for you, and you can't believe for somebody else. It is your own, and you can make a choice. Once you believe, or say that you believe, then you can state your belief, you can keep silent, you can also state what is not your belief. So what am I saying? I'm saying, friends, you and I are free. We are free to make our choices of belief. Nobody can force us. No matter what I put on the screen, it cannot force any of you to believe, because belief is your private property. Only you can take what I say and put on the screen, if you so choose, and put it in that place which is called the cubbyhole of your belief, and mull around and examine it, and if you choose, you add it onto your belief. So here's what we can draw back on. Nobody can make you believe. It's your own personal choice. But a personal choice does not make it true or false. In other words, beliefs do not create truth. So here I am with my personal belief, but it may or may not be true. What shall I do? Well, we could have a way in which we can better this situation, and that is to put two heads together. Two are better than one. So let's make a community goal to look for which is a more credible claim. Theism or atheism. But if you and I are going to do it together, then we will have to make certain ground rules. And here's the ground rule I'd like for you to come along with me with. We will depend and employ only evidence, not mere opinion. Only logic, not illogic. Only reason, not absurdity. So with these three, let's try to see how we can make a choice. Why is this debate inconclusive? It's been going on for decades and generations and even centuries. When I looked at it, here are some reasons why we might come to understand why it is inconclusive. Terms are not defined, the evidence is not defined, and there's lack of neutrality and something known as confirmation bias. Let's look at them. Do you know that atheists and theists disagree on the most basic term, God? How can you have a discussion if you disagree on the most basic term? Have you heard people say, who made God? If you say God made us, then who made God? The very question shows that the meaning of the word God is not agreed to by both sides. Because God, by definition, in some people's mind, is an uncreated being, unmade. So how can you ask that question? So right there, we are on two different wavelengths. And it cannot be a good, reasonable discussion. Evidence. Theists, believers in God, claim that they can describe evidence for the existence of God. Atheists are silent. They have never described the nature of the evidence that they say is missing. And believe me, I've gone all over the world. For 10 years I've asked, what is it that is missing, which, if it was there, would show everyone that there is a God in existence? Some have tried to answer that, but the moment we get into a discussion, they fall back and are silent. So, if we have not come to an agreement on even the question of evidence, how can we have a reasonable discussion? Neutrality. Each side approaches the question from its own angle and never from the center. You can go anywhere. And a person may be undecided but never takes a central, neutral position. They appear incapable of starting out neutral. And why is that? It's because of confirmation bias, which is the tendency to recall, select, or interpret evidence in a way that supports one's pre-existing beliefs. And how many people have confirmation bias? Everyone. Everyone has confirmation bias. 100% of the inhabitants on planet Earth. So, don't call anyone biased. Not because they're not biased, but because everyone is biased. Look, if everyone is only short-statured, what is the point in saying, get the short guy, I want to talk to him? No, it won't make any sense. So don't call anyone biased, and don't be called biased by anyone, not because we are not biased, but because everyone is biased. Why are we struggling with bias? You know, when I looked into it, I found something very interesting. Everyone, you and me, have in our minds three distinct attitudes. The attitude of a skeptic, the attitude of a believer, and the attitude of an inquirer. What do I mean by these? For example, the skeptical attitude, as soon as it hears a report, will dismiss it without even going into an inquiry. Whereas a believing attitude will simply swallow because they like it. An inquiring attitude will hold verdict until the investigation is done. Here's another set. A skeptic focuses on the question to the exclusion of the evidence because he doesn't like it. So dump as many questions there to destroy the report. Whereas the believer will look for the evidence. He doesn't want to look at any questions that are there. He dismisses the questions. Whereas an inquirer focuses on the weight of evidence. Now, what should you and me be if we want to make a fair inquiry? We should become inquirers, right? Not stay skeptical, not stay believing, but put them away and become inquirers. The difficulty is really this, that the skeptic also can inquire, the believer also can inquire. We may inquire as a believer or a skeptic and think we are fair, but that is not true inquiry, because we are not looking to know the truth, but to find evidence to support our own stand. The challenge is to become inquiring inquirers, not skeptical inquirers, not believing inquirers. Suppose we've stated that, and we want to become inquiring inquirers. It's only fair that we paint a picture of what an inquiring inquirer looks like. So here are 3 points. An inquirer in a controversial debate will never look at only one side. He always makes a counter proposal, so that there are 2 proposals. Do you know why? Let me quiz you. It's a trick question. When is a good decision a bad decision? And when is a bad decision a good decision? Wheels turning? Okay, let me tell you. A good decision might turn out to be bad if the alternatives were better and best and all you chose was the good. On the other hand, a bad decision might be a good decision if the alternatives were worse and worst. So when you made a bad decision, you avoided the worst and the worst, and therefore that bad decision is a good decision. What am I saying? If there are two sides, don't look at only one, because you might come to the conclusion this is good and you'll choose it without looking at the other side, whereas if you had looked at the other side, that was better and maybe the best, but you only chose the good. On the other hand, you could look at one side and say, boy, that is bad. I am not going to go that way. But you didn't look on the other side because that would have been worse and worst. So your bad decision might be actually a good decision. So, two options are always made. The second point, once you make the two options, you hold those as equal. I still remember presenting this at one of the meetings, and one of them came up to me and said, boy, you offend me. I felt offended when you said there are two equal options. I said, well, if you're an inquirer, an inquiring inquirer, you have to consider them equal. So we have two. You stand in the middle and consider them equal. And what do we mean by saying equal? We mean this: either option, and we say it honestly from deep within, either option will be acceptable as long as it is based on what we had agreed earlier: evidence, logic, reason. Are you thinking? Let me ask you, those of you who believe that there's a God in existence, if today I show you some reasonable evidence on the screen that actually the weight of evidence points to there being no God in existence, then will you be willing tomorrow to become an atheist? How about you, the others? If you believe that there is no God in existence, and today I show you some reasonable evidence that there is, after all, the supernatural, and there is a God in existence, then would you be willing to become a believer, a theist by tomorrow morning? Wow. Now, it's a different ball game, right? What am I saying? It takes raw guts to become an inquirer. It takes unfailing courage to remain one. So, we want to become inquiring inquirers. So let's make a decision, you and me, so that we are on the same journey together. How long do you think you will stay and remain an inquirer after making a decided position that you will be an inquirer? Do you know how long? I don't know for sure, but I'd guess that you would remain an inquirer for all of 2 minutes plus or minus a few seconds. Poke the bubble, burst it. The fact is we go zooming down to our side because we have confirmation bias. We are unable to do anything about this. And that's why if you really want to become an inquirer, an inquiring inquirer, then we need help. Agreed? Yes, we need help. We need to create an atmosphere in which we remain inquirers, at least get the best chance to remain an inquirer. So here's what I would propose, that we need 4 things. 4 factors to form that atmosphere. Number 1, humility. Number 2, honesty. Number 3, calmness. And number 4, respect. Let's go through each of them briefly. Humility. It is a learning attitude, a teachable spirit. We don't stand there with our chest puffed up saying, I know it all. In other words, it is standing small in the face of the vastness and grandeur of the information in our universe. Once you look at that, you become small in your own eyes, and that is humility. You begin to say, what do you have to say? I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to be taught. Honesty. This is really in short supply. I've talked to all kinds of people, not just the ones who are ordinary like you and me, but those who are at the top, the pastors, the bishops, the priests, the monks, the mullahs, and oh my, the amount of white lies and sometimes blatant falsehood that comes out. You know, I'll confess that sometimes I felt quite disgusted until I turned that question to myself and I asked, how honest are you? And oh, the revelation. I was just as dishonest as any of them out there. So in my evaluation of my honesty, if I was supposed to be honest, then I was honestly pretty dishonest. What do I do? Here I'm looking for something that I feel I should get at, but what if I'm dishonest? I realized I had to do something about it. So here's what I did. I made a definition of honesty, and I said that is what will drive me during the whole search. And here's my definition. The willingness to give credit to a point or argument, no matter who brings it to the table, and even if that credit has the possibility of destroying my own previous stand, and I've signed it electronically with my name. That is what would drive me. Boy, it has teeth in it. You're not going to just stand on one side and let all the ideas just pile up on your side. No, you're going to be open. You know what I called it? I called it the wow factor. Say wow when anything is impressive. Don't start scratching your head and saying, wait a minute. If I say wow, then who will get the point and the credit? Maybe he or she, not me, so I'm going to withhold. Nope, that won't be honesty. If it is impressive, just go ahead and say wow. You ready? Maybe we should be ready to say wow. Let's try it. 22/7 is pi. Actually, it's not 22/7. If you really do the math, it is 3.142, and it goes on in a very random fashion. So people have made that into a memory test. How many digits can you memorize? Do you know what the world record is? Take a guess. What do you think would be the maximum that a person might possibly remember? How many digits? A few years ago, this was the world record. It was held by Hideaki Tomoyori, a Japanese, who stood before hundreds of people, and over 17 hours and more, he recited pi to the 40,000th digit before making the first mistake. You got to say wow to that. I said wow. So that's what I mean. If something is impressive, you got to say wow. Calmness. Very important. Because anger really is against clear thinking, and hostility fights good judgment. In other words, if you let your emotions come up, which is very common in this topic, then out go judgment and reasoning out the window. You can't have both. So we've got to hold our emotions down. You know, when I speak like this, and when I present these seminars, there will be statements and ideas that I present that will really jar you. Can't help it. We are doing an honest search. But don't get angry. Don't get upset when I make some statement that really hits against you. Here's the challenge. When you hear something you completely disagree, then say to yourself, I disagree with this man. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a good argument, so good and strong that it will destroy his argument. If you want to really do that, you have to keep calm and collected, not upset and angry. Only then can you make a good argument to knock off mine. If you get upset and angry, we're not going to have a discussion, we'll have a fight. And that's not what we want. Calmness is holding your emotions in check. It is the natural outcome of possessing humility and honesty. Respect. Respect is not agreement. In fact, actually, it shines out best when there is disagreement. It is not admiration either, although we use these terms synonymous. What is it? It is the right we give others to make their own choices and beliefs, even if those beliefs come out to be diametrically opposite ours. We give them the right. So also, we expect them to give us the right to do that. And so we are mutually respectful. We never look down our noses. We never treat them condescendingly, with pity as if they know less than we. No, we respect them. We hold them equal to ourselves, and we say you have equal right to do whatever search you want and come to whatever conclusion you want to. So these four: humility, honesty, calmness, respect. They are a foursome that will probably create the best chance we have. It's not only in this debate, my friends. If you use these four in any situation in life, wherever there's a controversial topic, I think that no matter how bitter the fight, if you use these four, you will get into the argument, you will get into the discussion, and even if you disagree to your heart's content, you can come back to be friends at the end of the discussion. You will not fight. Use these four. They really will take you the distance. If you start from one end or one side, the tendency is to have two columns of argument. Mine, yours. So what I will do is pile up all the evidences on my side and look at all the deficiencies you have and point out those deficiencies. If there are holes, I shoot and knock you down. So two columns. But remember, we didn't start from the side. We do not want to do that. We have to start from the middle. And if that's the case, then I developed this idea called the PAN process. The PAN process does not have just two columns of argument, yours and mine. It has four columns. We look at both the options and we fight for both. Then we turn around and we fight against both. So we have four columns of arguments. Against and for A, and for and against B. That is the PAN process. What's the meaning of PAN? One meaning is that it goes across. A few years ago, we had the Pan American Airlines. It went across America. In other words, the process must take you across. Don't sit in one corner. Across. Go across. Pan also means to sift. Way back in the 1800s, the gold rush in California, the people came there to pan for gold. What's the meaning of panning? They had to sift, shift out the mundane and ordinary from the valuable. That's the other name or the meaning of pan. The third meaning, it just happens to be the first three letters of my family name, Pandit. So the PAN process is what we're going to do. It has four columns of arguments. Are you ready to get on to do the PAN process as an inquirer, as an inquiring inquirer? Let's go. 4 columns of argument. Column 1, arguments for atheism, the claim that God is non-existent. How many arguments? None. Wow, that is surprising. You know, you would never have come to that if you had not done the PAN process. Because the PAN process makes you come to be disciplined and discuss only 1 column at a time. And in this column, there are no arguments for atheism. Why? Because the statement of atheism is a negative statement. There is no God in existence. God is non-existent. And a negative statement is valid only when every possibility has been exhausted. Example? If I say there's nobody in this room by the name of Mr. Brown, how many names should I know before I make that statement boldly and correctly and confidently? I should know every name. Here's another example. If there are 10,000 lakes in the United States, and I sit up here very confidently and say there is no lake by the name Char Gog Agog Manchau Gagog Chau Banagan Gamaug, how many lakes should I know and be familiar with? I should know all 10,000 lakes and their names. Only then can I say there is no lake by the name Char Gog Agog Manchau Gagog Chau Banagan Gamaug. Incidentally, this name is the name of a real lake in Upper Massachusetts in the United States. It's in the Native American language, and translated it says, I fish on my side of the lake and you fish on your side of the lake and nobody fishes in between. But the point really is, if I should say that there is no lake by that name, I should know all 10,000 lakes. Let's apply this. If there is a God in existence, then he should be somewhere. In other words, the location is important. So let me ask, how many of you are conversant and familiar with every nook and corner of your town? No, he may be in somebody's closet, right? How about the world? No. Anyone been to the moon? Do you know that the moon has the light side and the dark side? And the dark side is always dark because that's how it is configured in the planetary system. It always faces the sun with one side. What if he set up his office on the dark side of the moon? Hey, it'll be hard to find that out. Have you been to the sun, 93 million miles away? Anywhere close by there? No. The sun is a star in our Milky Way galaxy. How many stars do you think there are in our Milky Way galaxy? Guesstimated by the astronomers. Do you know there are 200 billion stars? Been to anywhere there? How many galaxies are there that the astronomers tell us? You know, they look at one part of the sky, count the number of galaxies, and then they extrapolate that into the rest of the sky. They say there are over 200 billion with a B, 200 billion galaxies. In other words, if you look away from the Milky Way out into space, most of what you will see are galaxies, not stars. How many of them have you gone to? None. Look, even if you had checked out 99% of the known universe, you would still have 2 billion galaxies to go before you make that statement that I've checked it out everywhere and he simply is not anywhere. Furthermore, if there is a God, and if he made you and me and the world, then if I can walk and run, we should deduce that he also can walk and run, or move. So if I go to the kitchen looking for him, he could have gone to the living room. If I go to Canada, he could have gone to India. Got it? In other words, for us, any one of us, to say that there is no God in existence, we should know every nook and cranny of the entire known universe at the same time. Boy, That's a tall order. What does it mean? It really means some words we use as the attributes of God. Omniscient, you know every corner, nook and corner. And omnipresent, you have access to every place. You know everything at the same time. Those are the attributes of God. So, here's the conclusion we have to come to. If we have to honestly and reasonably say that there is no God, then we should have the attributes of God. Or become a God yourself. But then if you become a God yourself, you can't say there is no God. So in this column, no arguments. How many marks would you give this column out of 100? Has to be 0. Let's go to the next column. Column number 2. And in this column, we talk about arguments against theism, the claim that there is a God in existence. We'll look at 4 of them. They say, can you have evidence? And what they mean by evidence is empirical evidence. What's empirical evidence? It is evidence that's direct. Seeing, hearing, touching. I agree. There's no empirical evidence. But there are many other things that we accept without empirical evidence. How many of you really have empirical evidence that water is H2O? 2 of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. Have you ever checked it out whether that is really it? No, we deduced that. So there is no empirical evidence, but we all take it to be the truth of the matter. So we don't have to have empirical evidence to make a good decision. How about lack of design? Yes, there are many places on earth where everything is at random. No design, no pattern. At the same time, my friends, there are places that have pattern and design. So really, when you look at the fact that there is no pattern, it has to be balanced with the other fact that there is a pattern. So it is not a solid argument, not yet. How about number 3, which is a big one? If you say that there is a loving, almighty God, then how can you explain this evil, pain, and suffering that we all have every day in this world? What's the explanation? And since we don't have an explanation that is satisfying to us, and the contradiction is too big, we say God is non-existent. That is the argument that is made. But let's look carefully at that argument. And like I said, critically think. Here's a few ways of looking at it. Who is asking the question that there is a discrepancy? Everyone. The theist as well as the atheist. So if both of them have this as a burning, disturbing question, then the presence of pain and suffering cannot be the ultimate decider, because even with the pain and suffering, there are people who say, you can put it aside because they do believe in God. In other words, in the face of pain and suffering, they still can accept the existence of God. In other words, then the pain and suffering cannot be the final decider. Point number 2. Why do they say that it's a pointer to atheism? Because there's a contradiction. But a contradiction in features is not proof of non-existence. So this person is nice in the morning and nasty in the evening. Is he non-existent? No. The challenge when you see a contradiction is to get at the solution. It gives no license to dissolve the whole entity just because there's a contradiction. Third, why is it such a hard thing? Because it goes against the grain. Almighty loving God, pain and suffering. Clash. There's a clash of ideas. And therefore we throw it out. But what if we find something that is in line with an almighty, loving God. Shouldn't that also have its own weight? What am I saying? What am I pointing to? The fact that we don't have only pain and suffering in our lives. We also have joys and pleasures and delights. So if a contradiction points to atheism, then that which is not a contradiction should point to his existence. To be fair, if evil and suffering denote the absence of God, then joys and pleasures should denote the presence of God. Just to be fair. And we said we were fair, standing right in the middle, taking no sides. But the clincher to this is the next point. If there exists evidence for the absence of an entity, as well as evidence for the presence of that entity, then that entity is present. Oh wow, that's a long sentence. How do we know it's true? A simple example will clarify what I'm saying. Let us say the jurisdiction or the area we're looking at is this hall. And we want to know whether there's a mouse in this hall. The evidence for the absence of a mouse is a white spot. And the evidence for the presence of a mouse is a red spot. And mice sit under the chairs. So that is our theory. Mice sit under the chairs. A white spot is evidence for the absence of a mouse. A red spot is evidence for the presence of a mouse. Now let's look at this room. We'll go from this chair, white spot, white spot, white spot, white spot, everywhere white spot except that last chair there. Under that one chair, there is one red spot. Is there a mouse in this hall? Of course there is. What's the dictum? One piece of evidence for the presence will negate all the evidence for the absence of that entity. Let's apply it. If both evil and suffering, absence of God, as well as joys and pleasures, presence of God, are present in our lives, in our world, in our existence, then God exists. It's simple and it's pretty straightforward. You don't have to really have a convoluted sense of ideas to come to this. In other words, in column number 2, which are pointers against theism, we come to a very startling conclusion that their most powerful point is actually on the other side. Let's go on to the fourth one, creation. The problem with creation that any rational thinker has is that there's no observational data. In other words, nobody has seen creation taking place. And secondly, nobody can point to any scientific law or rule which tells us how creation could have possibly taken place. So, nobody saw it, no natural explanation. So it's difficult to believe. Granted, it really is difficult. But if we do not want creation, then what's the alternative? There are many, but let me point to one of them. It's called the standard model, in which the beginning point is not God, keep him out, that's theism. Here it is called singularity, a point at which the entire universe was once upon a time in the form of pure energy. No mass, just energy. Energy does not occupy space, so it was one point. That point expanded into the universe. But singularity, when you look at it, has great deficiencies in trying to explain how we could have singularity. There are many questions, big questions, that arise. So how do the physicists go past those questions? Here's how they do it. They say that the laws of physics do not exist in a singularity. How about Stephen Hawking, who said in real time the universe has a beginning at singularity, at which the laws of science break down? Did you get the point? The singularity has no natural laws explaining it. So, nobody has seen singularity, so there's lack of observational information regarding singularity. There's lack of any scientific explanation regarding singularity. How different is that from creation? Can you see that all the points that are raised against theism, against the idea that God is in existence, is always balanced out by some other factor? And in fact, the big one, pain and suffering, really shifts you to the opposite side. How many marks do you think you would give this column? The first column was 0. This one does not have huge marks, my friend. In fact, I would be tempted to put minus because the big point went to the other side. I'd say 20 points. Let's go to the third one. The third column, arguments for theism, for the claim that there is a God in existence. Let's go through 4 of them. Number 1, circumstantial. What's the meaning of circumstantial? Just a pointer. Not a proof, just a pointer. The numbers, billions believe. If just one person told me that they saw a white crow, I'd say, hey, wait a minute. But if 10 people said, well, we really saw one. It was a crow and it was white. I'd say, okay, I'd give it a chance. If 500 people said they saw that crow, then I would not throw the claim out. I would say, let's look for an explanation. Probably it was an albino. What I'm saying is that I wouldn't throw it out. It becomes circumstantial evidence. Number 2, very deep in the human psyche. We have about 5,000 years of human history. Do you know that in not one single generation has the idea of God ever been wiped out? Not even a single one. It is very deep in the human psyche. So it does become a circumstantial evidence. And number 3, the presence of design and purpose. People say that it's just apparent purpose. Wait a minute. What is the difference between apparent design and a real design? It couldn't be in the pattern because the pattern is there for both. You know, a few weeks ago, I was at the Napa Valley in Northern California. They have these vineyards. And if you go looking at a vineyard from a certain angle, it looks like all the plants are planted at random. And you can go from at this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, random. But suddenly you come to one angle and you see every plant in straight, real straight, like an arrow rose. So is there a design or not? Just because the majority of angles showed non-design, it does not mean there is no design. One angle is enough to show that there is design. And if there is design, my friends, there is a designer. So these are circumstantial. How about the anthropic principle? What's the meaning of anthropos? It's human. And the meaning is that there are factors that contribute to and sustain human life on a planet like ours, and those are very finely tuned. That's the anthropic principle. They are very exact and precise. For example, the expansion rate. You know, the universe could have expanded at any rate. Say from 1 millimeter in a billion years to the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, 300,000 kilometers per second. So the spectrum of the possibilities is huge. In fact, the statement says it is huge, the possibilities. A trillion, 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 trillion. A trillion of a trillion, of a trillion. In other words, that many possibilities, and out of those, only one's rate would have allowed us to live. If it was a little faster, a little slower, we could not have a universe that would be capable of supporting life. Similarly, with gravity, the four basic fundamental forces in nature, the strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. Which is the strongest? Strong nuclear force. Which is the weakest? Gravity. Do you know the spectrum? If you draw a line with millimeter marks on it and swing that line across the globe and to the moon and to the sun and across the whole of our Milky Way galaxy, how many millimeter marks would you find on it? And what if you stretched that line to the next galaxy? Boy, we would lost count completely of the millimeter marks. But those millimeter marks are the number of times that the strong nuclear force is bigger and greater than gravity. All right, impressed? Now, what would happen if we shifted gravity from the 1 millimeter mark to the 2 millimeter mark? Do you know what would happen? This Earth, which is about 7,000 miles in diameter, would get squished to a ball just 40 miles in diameter, and all life would cease. Can you see how finely it is tuned? In other words, gravity has an incomprehensibly narrow range for life to exist. And where are we situated? Between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms of the galaxy. I can't come up with an example of another place in the galaxy as friendly to life as our location. And this position, my friends, is not like sitting on a chair. I'd like to sit here and then a few minutes later, no, I'd like to go there. You can't do that in the galaxy. You're just there, set. And we are in the most friendly part of our galaxy. It is conducive to life. If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. Over the past 30 years or so, scientists have discovered that just about everything about the basic structure of the universe is balanced on a razor's edge for life to exist. The seemingly miraculous concurrence of these numerical values must remain the most compelling evidence for cosmic design. There is something going on behind it all. The impression of design is overwhelming. And if that impression is overwhelming, then the idea of design is overwhelming. And therefore, the idea of a designer also should be overwhelming. How about the next one? Logic. Logic requires two parts. The first part is a statement that everyone agrees. It's a statement that is understood to be acceptable to everyone. And on that statement, we make it the base. You have your steps of reasoning. If your basic statement is false and faulty, your conclusion will also be faulty, no matter how well the steps of reasoning have been taken. On the other hand, if your basic premise is okay, but your steps of reasoning are faulty, you will still get up to find a faulty conclusion. So we need both. Here's logical analysis number one. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. The universe had a beginning. Everyone knows that today. We didn't know it in the science world just in the previous generation. Do you know when they really came to the idea and to the confession that this universe did have a beginning? They finally agreed somewhere in the 1970s. Before that, silence. So it's agreed. This universe had a beginning. Now, in science, any change requires an explanation. If it's going at 5 miles an hour and suddenly 10 miles an hour, then there should be an explanation of the change. If it was going this direction and suddenly began to go this direction, there should be an explanation of that change. And the biggest changes are starting and stopping. So here we have a start. There has to be an explanation. In other words, there has to be a cause. So this universe had a beginning. Whatever begins, it's a big change, the biggest change, it had to have a cause. Therefore, the universe has to have a cause. Logical analysis number two. It's a pan-cosmological argument. The cosmos consists of METS, M-E-T-S, matter, energy, time, space. no effect causes itself. How reasonable do you think it would be if I say this pointer is the cause of the pointer? That wouldn't make much sense. Or this table is the cause of this table. No effect causes itself. We could say that the manufacturer was the cause of this pointer. We could say, maybe if this was made of wood, we could say that the carpenter was the cause of the table. But the table is not the cause of the table. And if this is made of glass, it is nice glass. The glass is not the cause of the table. In other words, even the material that is made up, that makes up the effect or the final product, is not the cause. The cause is distinct. The cause is distinct from its product. Therefore, the cause of the universe is distinct from the universe. Logical analysis number 3. It is the order principle, sequence. What comes first? What comes second? All causes produce effects, and all effects have a cause. But here's the order principle. The cause always precedes the effect. So, how do we apply it here? The first cause of the universe preceded the whole universe. Cosmos, M-E-T-S, matter, energy, time and space. In other words, we cannot appeal to matter, energy, time and space to be the cause of matter, energy, time and space. The cause is distinct. How about logical analysis number 4? Another order principle of science. A specific corollary of the order principle is the law that while one cause can have many effects, no effect can be quantitatively greater or qualitatively superior to its cause. Yeah, those are big words, I agree. But here's what it's saying simply. If you see me lift up 10 pounds of weight, and if my biceps is the cause of lifting up the 10 pounds, then we can safely conclude that my biceps could generate the force of at least 10 pounds, and actually more than that because it overcame gravity as well. So the cause is always at least equal to the effect, many times more. In other words, what we are saying is that the end product or the user, for example, your wallet and mine, will certainly have less money than the bank from where the money came. Your grocery bag and mine will have less vegetables than the grocery store. That's all we are saying. And it's logical. So let's apply it. The universe, our world, our existence has life, thinking, matter, energy, time, space, and the laws of nature. So the cause should have an abundance of life to give you and me and all the animal life, all the plant life. Also should have a giant intellect to be able to impart that to you and me. Also have immense power to give all the power to all the galaxies and the clusters of galaxies we see in the universe, and also have control of all of space and time to harmonize all the laws everywhere. So this cause is pretty impressive and amazing. When Albert Einstein looked at that, this is what he said. His feelings take the form of rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. Cause is pretty great. So what's the conclusion from our logical analysis? The universe has a cause. The cause exists distinct from nature and the universe. The cause preceded the universe according to the order principle of science. And according to the second order of principle of science, the cause is possibly huge, great, maybe omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. The next point takes into consideration an idea that is an extrapolation. It's a deduction. If there is a God, then the description is that things happened rapidly, quickly. If there is no God, then the description is that the universe came into being very slowly over millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years. So here is an argument that is a deduction of a process that happened quickly. We have to go to what is known as radioisotopes. Some of us don't know what it is. Let me tell you simply what it is. A radioisotope is a substance that gives off radiation. And the radiation comes off itself. So as it gives off the radiation, the mass or the amount of the substance itself comes down. It becomes less. So there is a formula. It's called the half-life. How long does that material take to become half its mass or amount? For example, from 20 to 10. Do you know that that is the exact same period that is required for the mass to go down from 10 to 5? And it is the same period of time that is required to go from 5 to 2.5, and the same from 2.5 to 1.25. In other words, if it halves itself, it has a set period. It's called the half-life of the radioisotope. For example, the uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.53 billion years. And the half-life of these subatomic particles, like the mesons, and the photons, and the baryons, and the bosons, they're millionth, 100 millionth of a second. We're looking at one particular radioisotope. It's called polonium-218. Polonium-218 has no precursors. In other words, it does not come from another substance. And its half-life is only 3 minutes. How many minutes? Half-life of polonium-218? 3 minutes. Suppose there's a bubble at the bottom of this glass of water, and it will take 3 minutes for it to climb up to the top, and then it's gone. But I want to hold the bubble. The only way I can hold the bubble is to quickly change the water into ice, and then I would have held the bubble. Agreed? Yes. So here's the question. It will take 3 minutes for the bubble to move from the bottom of the glass to the top, and then it's gone. So if I want to catch the bubble, how quickly should I turn the water into ice? Within 3 minutes. You're right. So if I see a glass of ice and there's a bubble inside that ice, caught inside there, then I can safely, reasonably deduce that the water was made into ice in 3 minutes or less. Got it? Yes. There are different types of rock that we come across. Igneous rock comes out from lava. Metamorphic rock that changes. Sedimentary rock. The material is brought and pressed down over a long period of time, becomes rock. There's another rock which is very peculiar. It is granite. Granite is a rock that we have not yet deduced or understood how it was formed. We know the composition. We know possibly the pressure and the temperature which must be applied to the composition to make it into granite. But whenever it is tried, it never forms granite. It forms another powdery substance. But here's the point. Every granite piece in the world, every, that has been studied, from the El Capitan in Yosemite National Park to maybe even the Rock of Gibraltar or any other place on earth, has polonium halos in them, not by just a few or handful, by the thousands. Polonium halos are what is caused when the radiation is given off. So when polonium-218 gives off its radiation, it forms a halo signature. So if we found halo signature in a granite rock, we can make a reasonable deduction that that granite piece was formed in 3 minutes. And if every piece of granite has polonium halos, then we can deduce that the granite, which forms basically the crust of the earth, was formed in 3 minutes, which is half-life. The full life is, say, about 5 hours. 3 minutes to 5 hours, half a day of the daylight time. Not millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years. So, the polonium halos could be a pointer to God. The polonium halos, unrefuted evidence for the Earth's instant creation. An exceedingly large number of polonium halos are embedded in granites around the world, which distinctly implies that our Earth was formed in a very short time. I spoke to the person who did this study. His name is Robert Gentry, and this is what he said. We have repeatedly challenged the Academy, which is the National Academy of Sciences, to publicly explain where the polonium halo evidence for creation has ever been scientifically invalidated. For over 15 years, they have refused to even try. And this is when I had asked him 5 years ago. So at least 20 years have gone by and nobody has refuted that piece of evidence. So as long as it's not refuted, it could point to a rapid process, which would be more like God in existence than like atheism. Column 4 is the final column. And in this we have arguments against atheism. Why would we say we will not possibly accept atheism? And here are the points. Number 1, it disallows evidence. Number 2, its fundamental premise is flawed. Number 3, it has to claim that the universe came from absolutely nothing. And number 4, we make a statistical analysis. Let's look at all 4 of them. It disallows evidence. Why? Let your mind now think, let the wheels turn. There cannot be evidence for that which has never existed. Got it? There cannot be existence for anything that has never existed. For example, if aeroplanes never existed, then no matter how many propellers or jet engines you find, no matter how many cockpits or fuselages or seat belts you find, it cannot be evidence for an aeroplane. It could be evidence maybe for a yacht or a speedboat or maybe even a submarine, not an aeroplane, because the aeroplanes simply don't exist. Got it? Simple. In other words, atheism is a conclusion prior to the inquiry, and this inquiry disallows any evidence for consideration. Once you say that there is no God in existence, you have moved away from any evidence that could possibly be brought. Because any evidence is now no longer for God, it's for something else. So it disallows evidence. The moment you state it and make a hypothesis, you have knocked off the evidence. Therefore, a process that does not like evidence is not scientific. Number 2, the fundamental premise. The fundamental claim of atheism we saw right in the beginning was that it is a reasonable scientific claim. But let's ask science what it says. Here's a statement from the US National Academy of Sciences. Science can say nothing about the supernatural. Whether God exists or not is a question about which science is neutral. It is limited to explaining the natural world through natural causes. So much for that claim. In other words, the claim is simply non-existent. The base which it says was science is not there. The philosophy of science could possibly be pulled in that direction, but even that fails. What's the philosophy of science? The philosophy of science states that science as a discipline will only look for natural causes to natural phenomena. It will never appeal to the supernatural. That's the philosophy. In other words, the supernatural is outside its study. So what is science doing? It is excluding the study of the supernatural. And if you have excluded the study, you have not excluded the existence. You have only excluded the study. In no way can science ever prove the non-existence of God? And here I make a dictum, a statement. Nothing in the natural world, nothing at all, can ever disprove the existence of God. So its fundamental premise, it is flawed. Origin, absolutely nothing. See, if there is no God, then the only option is that the universe came from absolutely nothing. And I'm not saying that. Look at the statements on the screen. So from nothing our universe begins. So where did the laws of nature come from? They came from nothing, the void out of which the universe spontaneously arose. How about the last statement on the screen? The only reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. I mean, it's I guess a borrowing from the Gettysburg Address. Wide, sweeping statement. So I had to ask, what is it based on? Nothing. Just a mere opinion. And we said we were not going to give just an opinion any weight. It's an opinion. But let's look at this nothingness a little closely. Let's look at it physically. And we'll build the Sears Tower. Or in Toronto, it'll be the CN Towers. Let's build the tower. But I'm not going to give you any material and no builder, no time, no space. I'm not even going to give you yourself. And if you are going to get ready to complain to me that you're not giving me any of these things, then let me confess to you, even I'm not in existence. Oh boy, now how are we going to build the Sears Tower and the CN Towers? Doesn't make good sense, right? In other words, absolute nothingness as a starting point is physically totally impractical. How about philosophically? Absolute nothingness cannot be imagined. Why do we say that? Because to imagine, you have to use your brain and mind. And you cannot imagine the non-existence of something that you are using. That's not possible. If you bang a nail into the wood with a hammer, you cannot afterward postulate the non-existence of the hammer. Then how did the nail go in? You know what I'm saying? If you cannot imagine it, and it's impossible to imagine that which you are using, because if you want to say absolute nothingness, you must imagine the non-existence of your own brain and mind. That cannot be possible. That which cannot be imagined cannot be proposed as a scientific theory, because there's no starting point to make or even to evaluate the theory. So philosophically, absolute nothingness as a starting point is an impossibility. How about scientifically? Look at what is stated by the scientists. And remember, I said don't get overwhelmed because a great scientist had said so. Go ahead and look at it and examine it. Here's what they say. Quantum mechanical fluctuations in the vacuum created the universe. By the laws of physics, nothingness is unstable. How about the statement that we all know, nature abhors vacuum? You know, scientifically, when you look at this, there's a mix-up of the void, which is total, absolute nothingness, and vacuum. They are two different things. Just look at nature. Vacuum? Do you know how you can get vacuum in nature? It is not just nothingness. Vacuum is a state only because the nothingness is surrounded by something. It's a physical barrier. If you take away the barrier, you will not have nothing. You will have stuff going inside there. So, a vacuum requires something to be a vacuum. So where is the pressure and the strength of the force? They will tell you that it's in the vacuum, but it really is not. The strength of that system is actually in the pressure that's outside the vacuum. It's very easy to check it out. Take a flask, suck out all the air, and you have a vacuum inside there. Now if you poke a hole on the side of the flask, you'll immediately know that the vacuum is an unstable entity. Air gets inside there. But where was the strength? Was it in the nothingness or in the something that was outside? In the air molecules, in the atmospheric pressure that was on the outside? You know, we can check this out so simply. Let's take this initial vacuum, which is in the flask, and put this flask in another bigger flask. And let's pull out the air from the bigger flask so that the bigger flask now has a vacuum inside it. So here is a smaller flask with nothing inside it, and a bigger flask also with nothing except the smaller flask, of course. Now, if we poke a hole in the smaller flask, what will happen? Absolutely nothing. There's no whoosh like we saw in the previous one. Why? Because there's nothing surrounding it. There is no atmospheric pressure, no air molecule surrounding it. In other words, here's the conclusion. Nothing that is surrounded by nothing, that is surrounded by nothing, that is surrounded by nothing to an infinite degree is infinitely stable. This question of laws of physics in which nothingness is unstable is only applicable to the state of vacuum, not to the state of absolute nothingness. By the way, you look at that statement, by the laws of physics. You're appealing to the laws of physics which were not even available at that point. So, scientifically, nothingness at the starting point is untenable. How about mathematically? Science, especially physics, may be represented as common sense wrapped in mathematics. You know, when you make a physics statement, it will not be acceptable until you have a mathematical formula to go along with it. You can't just say gravity. It is related to the masses of these two bodies and also to the inverse of the square of the distance between the two bodies. So you see there's a mathematical formula. So science is common sense wrapped in mathematics. So let's use that idea and apply it to our question. Let's make a statement that could possibly be made into mathematical formula. Here are the statements. Atheistic proposal says, nothing did nothing about nothing and produced everything. How about the theistic proposal? Someone did something about the nothing and produced the universe. So take these statements and make it into an equation. Here's what the equation looks like. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is equal to 100. How reasonable can that be? And theism says x plus y plus 0 is equal to 100. Now you can look immediately and see that the theistic proposal, which has numbers, could have a chance of reaching 100. If you start with 0, you will end up with only 0. You know, a few years ago I was talking to a postdoctoral fellow in mathematics, and I asked him this. I said 2 minus 2 is arrow 0. 2 minus 2 ends up with 0. Can you turn it around and say 0 lands up with 2 minus 2? He thought for a moment and he said, interesting question, but no, you can't come up to 2 minus 2 because there is an infinite numbers of options over here. 100 minus 100, half minus half, 0.2 minus 0.2. The only way, if you start with a number, with 0, and have this equation which ends in numbers, is to have at least one number on this side of the arrow. In other words, if you start with only 0, you'll end up with 0. To have any other option, you will have to supply a number. So what are we saying? Zeros, no matter how many, will end up with only 0. Let's put 5 zeros in a row. How much is that? 0. Now what you do is put a 1 on the left side of these 5 zeros and see what happens to that number. What are we saying? Zeros by itself is only zero. It requires a number to make it into anything. So absolute nothingness is mathematically worse than absurdity. I have here a book. It is written by a theoretical physicist. And here's the title: A Universe from Nothing. Can you see the big letters, nothing? You know, the first few pages are endorsements of the book by prestigious people. Like I said, don't be overwhelmed by PhDs and doctorate degrees. Look at what they are saying. And in these endorsements are the statements that I found. In this nothingness, there are many wonderful things to see. In the nothingness, wonderful things to see. How about Neil deGrasse, who is an astrophysicist? This is what he said in the endorsement. Nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something. So much for the title of the book, my friends. Can you see that even though you may be a big scientist, you are misleading? This title is quite misleading. In other words, actually it is false. But look at the endorsement given in the afterword by Richard Dawkins, who is arguably one of the most vocal atheists in the world today. And this is what he said in his ending. The title means exactly what it says. And I say the title means exactly what it does not say. Or rather, it does not say the truth of the matter. The universe could never have come from nothing. What they really mean, if you read the book, is that the nothing does not mean nothing. It just means pure radiation. But that's what the entire universe came from. So it's not nothing, it's everything. Statement, title, false. Absolute nothingness is physically impractical, philosophically an impossibility, scientifically untenable and actually scientific, and mathematically worse than absurdity. Here's the aphorism that I was talking about. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. The difficulties of belief may be great, the absurdities of unbelief are greater. How about the last one? Statistical analysis. You know, chance is subjective. What's the chance of this happening? What's the chance of that happening? But it's also a mathematical concept, and it's called probability. It's a very specific formula. You plug in the numbers and it comes out. These are the chances. 1 is to 10, 1 is to 100, 1 is to 1,000. I'm going to state some numbers, and they are actually arbitrary numbers. And I agree they are arbitrary, but don't look at the actual numbers, look at the trend of the numbers. For example, if there is something that will happen 10 to the power of 8 times, which is 100 million times, in the circumstances, it will always happen, and only once it will not happen, then in day-to-day life we say it will happen. If it will happen only once and will not happen 100 million times, then we say it's not going to happen. In scientific evaluation, the number goes up to 10 to the power of 15, 1 quadrillion. This is the number that scientists have to use when they construct anything that has a risk of life and limb. For example, a suspension bridge. Then the angles at which they put the girders, the strength of the cable, these have to be tested to mathematically to 10 to the power of 15 times. Then they can use it. In other words, safe. 10 to the power of 15 times it will occur, once it will not occur, fact. If it will occur only once, will not occur 10 to the power of 15 times, not possible. Now when you state a law, the number goes up to 50. 50 is 1 followed by 50 zeros. That's a big number. In fact, actually it's going over our heads, right? It goes over my head too. Let me give you an idea of what we mean by these numbers. But these numbers are not exact, remember? They're arbitrary numbers, but let me give you an idea of what the number is. If I am testing the law of gravity, once per second. I am looking for that one chance in which this pointer will not come down, but will just stay there when I leave it or float away. I'm looking for that one chance, and I'm doing it once per second. You know, to do it 10 to the power of 18 times will require 15 billion years. To do it 10 to the power of 20 times will take me 1.5 trillion years. And why the 15 billion years? It's the approximate age of the entire universe. So if, let's say there are 10 billion of us on this earth, if all 10 billion of us did this every day without a break, from the time the universe began up to now, we would have reached only 10 to the power of 28 times. So what am I saying? 10 to the power of 50 is a huge number. Fair enough? Yes, it is. So, one chance occurrence, 10 to the power of 50 chances non-occurrence is an utter impossibility statistically. Let's apply that. So Michael Denton was the first one to actually challenge the idea of the origin of life according to the theory of evolution. The initial cell to be viable would require at least 100 functional proteins. So what are the chances that we could get 100 proteins at the same point, at the same time, and form that cell? His calculation showed a chance of only 1 in 10 to the power of 2,000. That's a huge number. And remember, 10 to the power of 51 is a number that is 10 times bigger than 10 to the power of 50. So where is 10 to the power of 2,000? Suppose we address Sir Michael Denton and say, look, I'm not very sure whether you did it right. I think your number is wrong. It should be brought down by half. No, not by half. 1/10. No, 1/100th. No, you made a big mistake, Sir Michael Denton. Your number should come down by a factor of 100 billion. You made a big mistake. So, okay. What is 10 to the power of 2,000 divided by 100 billion? Remember, we are trying to bring it down to 10 to the power of 50 so that we can have a say in the matter. You know what is 10 to the power of 2,000 divided by 100 billion? It is 10 to the power of 1,989. 10 to the power of 50, nowhere in sight. So these numbers are so big. They are arbitrary, but they are so big that you cannot really question them. How about the next one? You know, these proteins are made up of amino acids. Amino acids are little building blocks, and you have to have them in a chain. Amino acids have left-handed links, right-handed links. When people manufacture amino acids in the laboratory, you always get what is known as a racemic mixture, meaning 50% right-handed, 50% left-handed, and we know of no way of changing those numbers. It is always a racemic mixture, 50%, 50%. But inside that cell, all the amino acids, and we need 10,000 amino acids to make the 100 proteins, all 10,000 amino acids must be only left-handed. And in the chromosome, which is in the nucleus, the chromosome is made up of nucleotides. We need 100,000 nucleotides to form that chromosomal chain. And in the cell, all 100 nucleotides have to be only right-handed. So what are the chances that we are going to get 10,000 left-handed amino acids and 100,000 right-handed nucleotides at the same point in time and space to form that cell? Here's what one person says who calculated it according to him. It says there's only one chance in 33,113. Are you impressed? Are you willing to say wow? I was willing to say wow. But just in case you are not, let me try once more. There is a person whose name is Harold Morowitz. He calculated the chances of all the components of the cell coming together, all. Cell wall, cell membrane, cytoplasm, Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, everything. What is the chances that one single cell would be formed? Do you know how many cells are there in your body and mine? Anywhere from 60 to 75 trillion. But here we're talking only about one, the original one. What are the chances that we get all the components together at one point? Here is the statistical chance. 1 in 10 to the power of 100 billion. And that is just to bring the stuff together. You got to teach each one what to do. That's not in this number. And then we got to teach them how to divide. The cell must divide, and once the cell divides, both of them must be still alive. How does that happen? You got to teach that. That's not in the number. Then when it becomes more complex, and more complex, then plant life, animal life, then human life, and then somewhere along the line was injected into this complex organism an appreciation for friendship, for loyalty, for love. Can you see the list really is endless? If the list is endless, what are the chances of it occurring? If only two possibilities exist, and there are only two, atheism and theism, and if only one is correct, then if A is possible, so is B. But if A becomes improbable, B will become probable. And if A becomes impossible, B becomes fact. Really? Let's check it out. First, a lecture on mathematics. And here's the lecture. 6 minus 3 is equal to 3. Now, when you look at the first number and the last one, when there's a subtraction sign, the last number is always smaller than the first number if there's a subtraction sign. In other words, a number minus another number, the product or the end will always be smaller than the first number. That is our mathematical lecture. Over. Now time for the test. So I'm going to give you a test. But here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you a problem to solve, and then I will give you the answers. 2 answers. Only 2. One of them is correct. Got it? The lecture says that a number from which another number is subtracted will end up with a number that is smaller than the first number. Here it is. The problem. What is 11 minus 6? And I'm going to give you 2 options. The first option is 19. And the second option, I've written it down, but I'm not going to show it to you. So option A is 19, option B is hidden. Which one will you choose? Option B, of course. Why? Because option A is bigger than the first number, and it is impossible, once you have a negative sign, subtraction sign, for the number to be bigger. And therefore, the other option is the correct one. Did you get it? You don't have to see it to know that it is correct. You don't have to see it. If you show this to be impossible, then the other becomes fact. People say, hey, why can't we see? Fine. But if statistically it's impossible, then this is fact. In other words, if it is statistically, utterly, totally, completely impossible for the first cell to have gotten together by itself, then the only reasonable scientific conclusion is that somebody supervised it. It didn't do it by itself. So here's what we come up with then. A word from Sherlock Holmes, the super detective of the previous age. How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? Have we made our points. Column number 1, 0. Column number 2, 20. Column number 3, which we said was, the circumstantial evidence, the anthropic principle, the logical analysis, and the question of the granite formation. How many points would you give it? I'd say I'd give it 80, because there's nothing that hits against those points. How many points would you give this last column number 4? The strength of the arguments. From nothing, we saw it was strong. Statistical analysis, strong. In other words, I'd say it'll be close to 100, but let's make it 80. So here's the summary of the PAN process. Column number 1, 0. Column number 2, 20. Column number 3, 80. And column number 4, 80. Now let's put it together, because atheism is columns 1 and 4. And what you got to do is put a negative sign on the column 4 and shift it over to the other side, because you're taking it to the other side. So you have to have a minus. These are points against atheism. So atheism is 0 minus 80, which lands up minus 80. Theism is 80 minus, which is column 3, minus the 20 in column 2. 60. Look at the strength of these numbers. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. You could have put your own numbers, but you do not have the numbers on the same side of plus and minus. It is not that theism is, say, 30 and atheism is 40 or 20. It is theism being on the positive side. So it wins not by a small margin, it wins completely, because the other side is negative. And a negative cannot stand before a positive number. So mathematically, we have shown something here, my friends. In other words, the final conclusions, options. Theism is difficult to believe. No question about it. We do have a hard time. But look at the options we have. Agnosticism is totally impractical and unreal. And atheism is baseless and absurd. So yes, if we take the stand that theism is a bad decision, then I'm suggesting to you that the alternatives are worse and worst. Therefore, the bad decision is a good decision. Agreed? You can break it down if you want, all my arguments. You can come with a Q&A period later on. So here's my conclusion. Based on evidence and reasonable logical thinking, the existence of the supernatural is valid and makes the better sense. Therefore, the existence of God is a rational, credible claim. If I were an attorney, a lawyer, in a court case, I would turn to you as members of the jury and I'd say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here are my arguments. I rest my case. Thank you.